record. And if
there we go. Thank you.
Tammy or Karen, if you wouldn't mind just keeping an eye on the chat, if there are any questions, you can interrupt me as I'm going. I'll try to keep it up and take a look at it. So hey folks, my name is Matt Lacey. I am the director for the Southeast jurisdiction, UMVIM. Been doing this for almost 5 years now, which is crazy. Time has gone by really fast. And most of the time when I do trainings, we talk about team leader trainings and a lot about mission and mission theology. When we were planning the academy, we had this idea, Karen, I think, had this idea of doing photography, and I got really excited and really geeked out over this. Photography is a hobby of mine and a passion. I look younger than I am, and when I started photography, it was at the tail end of the film days. And I remember in college taking photography and spending long nights in the dark room developing film, and I do miss that some. But photography is a good hobby of mine. I love doing it. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about photography itself, why it's meaningful for mission. I want to talk a little bit about etiquette for photography and mission, what to do, what not to do, and kind of share some of my own experiences there. We'll go a little bit into just kind of basic photography, like the best way to frame a shot, what you need to look for, stuff like that. And then we're going to talk about, instead of using a big heavy camera, using your phone to document your mission experience, which phones now are a great tool to do that. They can be confusing a little bit. So I'm not going to go too in depth here. I'm just kind of give you a surface level, but I have some resources at the end that if you want to dive further into exploring photography on your mobile device more seriously, there are some great free resources out there that you can use. And again, it really is a powerful tool. So I want to talk a bit about why photography is really important. To me, I fell in love with photography because sometimes a good photograph can convey a message or a meaning that simply words can't. And we all know the truism, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And in many cases, that is true. I fell in love with photography as a way to see new sides of people, as a way to express myself in a somewhat, or I think, artistic way. And so it's something I've been doing for years and years, and it has turned into a bit of an expensive hobby. Most of the time I use my big SLR camera, my Leica here, with all its lenses for photography, and it's heavy. And, when I lead a team, I usually take it, but it really is something that really resonated with me. And I'm sure for some of you too, you may be a hobbyist as well, like me. So all that to say, I'm not a professional, I'm an amateur, but I'm more than happy to share my experience with you. So anyway, so why photography is important. So many of us know that when we go on a mission journey and we come home, we have this powerful story that we can tell. And often stories will convey the essence of a journey or a meaning behind the journey. But sometimes photos and videos really portray that in a way that words can't simply do. Photos have the power to capture a story in a nutshell. And photos also have the ability to change hearts and minds. And just a quick example of that, if you remember in the civil rights era, while the streets in my hometown of Birmingham were filled, back in the late 60s, some of those protests weren't getting solid media coverage, or they were getting biased media coverage, not showing kind of the ugly side of what the police were doing to the peaceful protesters. And you may remember some iconic images from the Birmingham protest, specifically of a one where a Birmingham police officer is holding back a canine from one of those civil rights protesters. That image alone really captured the media's attention and really captured the world's attention and really shined a light about what was going on in the civil rights movement and changed a lot of minds and really told a story that nobody was telling before, or a story that people were simply ignoring. So photos are very powerful. You could probably think of some iconic photos, on the cover of National Geographic or others in your mind. They really are a powerful experience to tell a story. They also allow us to remember experiences. Every couple of months or so, my wife and I, as I'm backing up photos or loading new photos into my laptop that I've taken, we just kind of flip through all the old photos that I've taken to kind of remind us of all of our travels and the good times we had. We honeymooned in Japan, my wife and I, and so those pictures mean a lot to us and really help us remember about the time we had, the great experience we had there. And photos also document our life and the ones we love. I probably have literally thousands of pictures of my kids on my phone and on my big Leica, and I'm sure for those of us who are parents or grandparents, you have the same too. So photography is special, and it really is a great tool and a way to share a story, particularly in mission. So just to give you two examples, so these two photographs that you see here on the screen, on the left here, this is his name is Francisco. This was in 2004. I was spending a month in Mozambique. This was the first time I had gone overseas when I was in college, and Francisco, I was kind of in a daze, having just arrived in Mozambique, all these feelings of experiencing new cultures and everything. It was just a really overwhelming experience for me. And I remember just being exhausted at the end of one day, sitting down at one of the beaches in Mozambique where our group had kind of went for an afternoon break. And I remember sitting next to Francisco. He was mending his fishing nets, and we couldn't understand each other at all. It was just, we were just kind of sort of communicating in cursory English and body language, but Francisco was kind enough just to let me photograph him for 20 and 30 minutes. And this is one of my favorite photographs I've ever taken. It really reminds me of that time. It reminds me of the way people connect across cultures. The photo on the right is a picture also from Mozambique in that time. These two boys were at the work site every day, kind of watching us as we were building this church. And they were with us the whole time and allowed me to photograph them, and a couple of silly photographs. And so those photographs of that first big mission journey I took, I'm especially fond of and look back on often. So because photography is powerful, this can be a very good thing or it can be a very bad thing in mission. We've discussed the good a little bit about telling the story, conveying a message that sometimes you can't put into words, but sometimes photographs can cause harm. And I know I've been on mission teams and been on mission journeys where either due to my own being naive, have taken some photographs without asking permission, or taken photographs that probably in retrospect were not tasteful. Were sort of, I took them not so much to convey a message other than look how poor these people are. And so sometimes photography can be a detriment to mission and what we are there to do in our experience with mission. So sometimes, at our worst, we can use photography and just view people as other objects, and we use them to go home and tell the story of these pitiful poor people who are overseas. And also to sometimes we take photographs that capture somebody or a community who's just having a bad day or in a bad moment. Um, I think for a lot of us, we've all served in experiences like disaster response or recovery. And for somebody who's just lost their home or in this devastating situation, taking a photograph of them in that moment is really not fair to them, I mean, unless you have their permission, because that is trying to tell a story or convey something that is a very small snippet of their life and portrays them at a very vulnerable time. Um, so all that to say, photography is a great tool, but we can also use it in a very wrong way sometime with mission as well. So I want to kind of go through quickly some do's and don'ts of photography, particularly in mission, and some things that can go wrong. So this photo that you see on the screen here, which I know looks like almost nothing, this is a photograph a friend of mine took. It was an incidental photograph. It's really not a very good photograph. He was just kind of shooting a bunch of things. So this was in Costa Rica in San Jose. And the reason I put up this photograph is because late one night, he was outside his hotel. He was at this monument close to the hotel. I'm not really sure what the monument is, but he was in this park and was just taking photographs and trying to get a good shot of this monument. And one of the parents that you see here in this photograph came up to him and confronted him. It was very, very angry that he was taking photographs, and he was very confused about why this was, and didn't really understand why the guy was frustrated, didn't really understand what he was saying, and kind of brushed it off and walked away. And then right as he got back to the hotel, he noticed that two police officers were approaching him and stopped him before he got back to his hotel, and they asked to see his camera and what was on it. And the police officers in broken English explained to him that in Costa Rica, taking photographs of children that are not your own is a very big faux pas. And in fact, there are some laws against it in Costa Rica. And so here was my friend just kind of innocently going and shooting this monument late at night, just really not thinking anything of the crowd and the people around it. He was just trying to get a good night shot. But because there are children around playing, this was very offensive to the parents, and that probably broke some local laws in the process. So all that to say, I know many of us have been on mission experiences, and whenever we go, particularly overseas, there will be children around usually. And we love to interact with them, we love to play with them, but sometimes photographing children can be a very big problem. And so when children are present and a guardian or a parent is present with them, before you take a photograph of a children, even if this in the background or very incidental, it's always best to ask permission before you do that. This is something that has changed over the years. I used to be able to photograph anything really, and nobody would think anything of it. But now, particularly with children and minors, you really want to pay attention when you photograph them. So one rule of thumb is, when in doubt, if you're not sure whether it's appropriate to take a photo or not, just ask. And if you're photographing somebody in another culture, and you're the team photographer, I always like to try and learn the question, may I take your photo in the native language, just to make sure that I'm very clear about what I'm doing, what I'd use it for, and just to get basic permission before I take somebody's photograph. No means no. If they say no, then that's fine, and you brush them back off. If you're taking pictures of something and somebody is concerned that they're in the photograph and they want to watch you delete that photo, be kind and do it. You are taking someone's picture, and that is their life, that is their story, that is their image. And if they don't want to be in your photograph, they don't have to be. And so be gracious, be kind, and always be sure to try and ask before you do that. Research cultural issues that might affect photography as well. And so in some cultures, taking photographs may not be such a something that is allowed, such as in other cultures. I mean, here in the States, people are photographing things all the time. You can't go to a restaurant with somebody, having their phone and taking pictures of what's on their plate, or, taking selfies in their car to make sure that their hair is straight or their makeup's on right. And so we're used to taking photographs all the time, but in other cultures, that may be something they're not used to. And so making sure you understand that and what the cultural mores are before you go is important as well. One other thing I tell mission teams as well, when I lead a mission team, I don't like to have, if I have a team of 20 people going, I don't want to have 20 different photographers around trying to all take the same picture. What I tell folks is we will have one photographer on this team, and I'll delegate that responsibility to somebody who knows what they're doing, if that's not me. And I just tell folks, leave your cameras, let this person, they know what they're doing. They will be sure to take good photographs. That is their job. You focus on the project, the relationships with the people, and let somebody else do that. I remember I was leading a very small team to the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And I remember like 3 or 4 team members that I had in the back seat, just kind of reaching out the window and just 3 or 4 of them just with cameras out the side windows, just taking pictures of everything. And it was causing a lot of attention and a lot of unwanted attention to our transportation. And so try and avoid that on mission as well. Just delegate one person to do this responsibly, and it usually will help to solve all of those problems. So before I go on, any questions about etiquette, about any personal quick stories you want to share about do's and don'ts with photography on mission experiences? I'd love to hear some that you have, if anybody has any.
Connie had a suggestion that if when you are going to a place where the language may be difficult to pronounce or to say, to have the phrase, "May I take your picture," written on a card that you could show.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Connie.
Yeah, I know people coming to China had a problem with saying that. You write it on a card, in the characters is very helpful. Yeah, I will share that, you're spot on about certain things. I went to a Buddhist temple once. Maybe your eyes are rising as I was taking pictures, just enjoying myself immensely and not realizing that that was definitely not to be done in the Buddhist temple. So I learned in a hurry when someone came up to me and said, please don't do that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Thank you for that. I wish I'd had this presentation before I had done that, but that was many years ago when we didn't think about such things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Connie. Anybody else have any?
Hey, Matt, I find that photography is a great tool for ERTs. The fact is that you've got the people that go out and do assessments. They can get a good idea on what's happening and share that with the teams that are going to properly tool up, gear up, and do the right thing, if you will. And it gives us also a follow-on to what did get done, did we do it right, and to share it with the VIM teams that possibly could be going back later.
That's a great comment, Mike. We're talking a lot about photography as art or self-expression, but photography can be a helpful tactical tool as well in mission, documenting a project or a particular area so teams can be prepared. Absolutely.
I had one thing, Matt.
And I think
if you're in a larger kind of a group situation or a crowd and you don't know who to ask about taking a picture, take your camera out and kind of hold it up. And if it's not appropriate, somebody will tell you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to make sure that people understand that when you take pictures, when you post them on social media, especially of children, you really do need to have permission. And I mean, like youth teams, permission from the parents, because we got into trouble with a young lady that went on a team, and she was actually being hidden from her father. And because of social media, he found her, and it got bad after that. So really make sure you have permission of all your team members, and as many, especially if we use written permission as required in my conference. So
That's a good thought, Rhonda. And I think somewhere on our website there is isn't there a sample photo release on there? I think there is. So that's always a good tool as well. Yeah. Anybody else have any quick experiences they want to share? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of photography basics. And again, I'm not a professional. I mean, I have been paid to photograph things, but this is not what I do full time. I mean, this is a hobby. And so if you want more technical advice, there are plenty of free resources out there. But just kind of give you a rundown of basics of photography and composition. Again, I'm not going to delve into this a whole lot, but just to give you some ideas of what is the consensus of how to frame a photograph and what makes a good photograph. So I'm sure if you've done anything with photography, you know the rule of thirds. And when you talk about the rule of thirds, essentially, and actually your phone's camera can put a grid up so you can see the thirds on the grid. But essentially the rule of photography is you want to divide your frame up in thirds, and your subject will either stick to 1/3 of the photograph or 2/3 of the photograph, unless you're doing portraits and close up. So usually that rule of thirds is a good rule to live by as you're composing photographs. Here, let me go back to, so you see here, this photograph of Francisco right here on the left side. So you see that Francisco is in the right 1/3 of the frame, essentially. And then on the bottom of the photograph, you see that his hands and the net, they're on the bottom third of the photograph. And so you have this upper left-hand quadrant, this 2/3 of this is essentially blank. There is no subject there. And the thinking there is to isolate a subject, to keep the focus on what you're photographing. And so you see Francisco there kind of taking up the vertical 1/3 on the right side, and then on the bottom, on the horizon, the third on the bottom as well. And so just as a rule of thumb, when photographers photograph something, they try and stick to this rule of thirds. It is not a hard and fast rule. And certainly there are other styles of photography, but I found just to create visually arresting photographs and good ones, particularly of people on a mission, it's usually a good rule to live by, that rule of thirds as well. Depth of field is something, and again, I could talk a lot about these technical aspects, but depth of field is essentially what you are focusing on as you are taking a picture. And so if you have a subject that is in front of you, say a person, and there is you'll see here on the graphic up here on the screen, you have the subject there on the left, a person, and then behind there are some trees back there. And depth of field is essentially something you do to keep the focus on your subject and not on the incidental things in the background. And so if you're taking a picture of somebody, usually, when you're doing a portrait, you want to isolate that person and you really don't want to pay attention to the stuff going on in the background. And so depth of field is something you can adjust on even your phone as well with photography apps to keep the focus on your subject as well. Depth of field is something that photographers talk about when they talk about aperture and f-stops. And again, I'm not going to go too far into this, but the aperture, the f-stops, that's a really important setting on your camera to keep whatever the subject is in focus and to keep the background out of focus. And you can adjust that depending on what you're photographing as well. We talked about balance a little bit with the third of the photograph and the rule of thirds. So I won't get into that as well. The shutter speed is essentially what it means for how much light is coming into the camera. So shutter speed, if there is a lot of light present with a subject, essentially the rule of thumb is you want a fast shutter speed. You want the shutter to click really fast because there being so much light, the camera can only take in so much, and you don't want a big, bright, completely white photograph. And so you want your shutter to open just a little bit. At night or when you're in a low light situation, you want the shutter to be open longer so the camera has more time for the light to come into the lens. And again, I know all this is technical and may be confusing, so I'm not going to focus too much on it, but just some kind of basic things to look at as well. Viewpoint, I really love playing with viewpoint and taking photographs. And if you're really not sure what is a good photograph, or maybe you're looking at something and you're like, you know, I want to take a photograph of this, but it's not particularly interesting, right? I'm having a hard time just making it interesting. Shifting your perspective of where the photograph is taken is also a good tool as well. So you'll see here on the right side of the screen, this is a Haitian child. And rather than just taking his picture as a portrait, he was kind of mimicking what I was doing with my camera. So I was holding up my camera to my eye, and he was very playfully just kind of mimicking what I was doing. And I thought it was a really interesting way to frame him as a subject because he's isolating his eyes, which are very beautiful eyes. And so if you're not sure how to photograph something or just want to make it a little more interesting, changing or shifting your perspective is a good way to do that. So taking a photograph at ground level, looking up, or taking a photograph top down, or adjusting from landscape mode, which is kind of the wide mode, to portrait mode, which is up and down. So there are some cool things you can do with viewpoint and perspective as well as you're taking photographs. Framing, we've talked a little bit about framing in the rule of thirds, but again, using this photograph on the right, this Haitian child, you see that he's kind of done the job of framing for me with his hands, right? So I was struck by his eyes, and I really didn't have to create a frame in the photograph. He was doing that for me. And so you can do that when you are looking at things to take images as well. Look for unique framing opportunities. So you can do that between trees or two objects and having somebody in the middle. You can do it up and down where someone is framed by two horizontal lines. So there are different ways to do that, and just playing with your perspective can give you some neat photographs as well. Symmetry is important too, and so most of us, when we take photos, we take a photograph of a subject that is right directly in the middle of the camera, which sometimes can work, particularly if there's nothing in the background. But you can also play with symmetry too in photographing things. Let me see if I have an example of symmetry here. Hang on a second. Well, I thought I had more photos in here. Well, anyway, so having a symmetrical photograph is another way to frame as well. So these are just, again, I know some of this is very technical and some of it you may get confused by if you haven't heard these terms before, but just wanted to give you some basic kind of idea of composition and photography if you didn't know some of these already. And I'll share some photos excuse me, some resources at the end as well to help you learn more about that. So any questions about photo basics, or is anybody out there like me who's an amateur or hobbyist that wants to share some experiences that may be helpful to folks?
I was in the Navy for many years and carried a camera around a lot. And one day I had a very interesting photograph, which I should have entered in some kind of a contest because it was very unique. But I was on the Indian Ocean during the Iranian hostage crisis. I had the aircraft carrier that I flew off of kind of off to the right, and in front of the aircraft carrier and up in the sky to the left was a Russian Bear, which is a reconnaissance airplane surrounded by our jet fighters that was escorting it. And farther to the right behind the aircraft carrier, believe it or not, was a rainbow. And the rainbow is what made that photo probably so unique.
I'm interested to know too, if anybody wants to share, is there a particular photograph that you have taken or somebody has taken on one of your mission teams that's particularly meaningful to you that anybody wants to share about really quickly? No amateur photographers in this bunch.
I had wished I had known earlier because I have a great photo that I use when I'm out teaching and when I'm out garnering teams, and it's a picture of an 8-year-old boy down in Louisiana, and we were out in the marshes, and we were doing some work at this house, pre-work the day before, meet the family, go through the stuff, go back the next day to go in to do work, and this house was a very difficult living conditions in there for the family. They actually had to take turns in who got to sleep and when. And so it was a very busy and active facility in there. So it's hard for us to make arrangements to work around their schedule. And as we're going through this, we pull up the next morning and we back in our trailers and we get our gear out and we start working on things. And all of a sudden this little boy pops out of the house, just pops out. But it was after all the school buses and all the family and everybody else had left. And they made arrangements to leave the house to stay alone. So it was just us working in the house. So we didn't expect anybody to be there. This little boy comes running out. Hector, what you missed your bus. I know, I did. He says, but I had to stay here. He says, I had to do my work. What do you mean do your work? He says, I got to make sure make sure the gators and the snakes don't get you guys. So he became our post, if you will, of our photography for the day. As we took pictures and things, he was there helping us work, and he was there. He had taken one of the hats from one of the workers over there, and that was his daily wear, and he was just part of the team. But having him to be the focus was just so huge. And we did take the pictures and so on, but how do you ask permission of an 8-year-old? So we did ask the parents and so on into there, and they had a little hesitation because they hadn't seen that kind of involvement with their family, and especially their kids. And they'd only had negative kind of things going on with them and such. So it took a little bit of convincing, and they did finally let us do it. But it was a great photo. And gee, I wish I had some to share with you because they were just awesome. But like you did with the little boy and the focus of his eyes. It's just his intent to be there. He knew he was going to get in trouble with his parents because he hid in the closet while all the other kids got on the school bus to run. They ran through the house, they pull all the kids out, they give them the school lunch and so on. And he was hiding the whole time. And he was begging us all day, please don't tell mom and dad, please don't tell mom and dad, please don't. But he was so intent to be there and be a helper. And it was just like your photo here. It was just the intent of his goal for the day.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Karen said in the chat too, if you would like to share photos of some you've taken, you can send them to her and she'll email them out to the group as well. Andrea, do you have a?
Yeah, I'll just do this, just talk anyway. So, yeah, I enjoy your stories about Mozambique because I've been there many times. And my favorite moments working in Mozambique were early in the morning, we'd go down to the beach in Shikuki and watch the sunrise and watch the gentleman. It's a fishing village. So this is their livelihood. So we go down early in the morning and watch the sunrise and watch the men working with their nets, like the picture of the gentleman that you were showing, and just watching them and trying not to be too intrusive and always asking if we could take pictures as well. But sometimes they didn't, sometimes they did. It depends on if we knew how well we knew them. But that was one of my favorite ways to start the day before we go to work at the hospital. And really enjoyed that. And another moment, been to Bo, Sierra Leone a couple of times, and we were out in the bush working in this clinic in this abandoned school. It was in a village. It was a school being used as a clinic during this time that we were there. And there was this wall, had kind of designs in the wall, and you could see through it. And I was taking photos of the designs in the wall, and there was this woman who peered through the wall, and all I can see was, I took it in black and white. And because it was just the expression on her face, all I could see, like this little Haitian boy, I could see her eyes and part of her head covering peeking through one of the holes in the wall of the designs. And I took a photo of it, and it was in black and white. And I didn't really think anything. I loved it. I loved the expression on her face, because she wanted me to take a picture of her, because she was purposely trying to get my attention so I could take a picture of her. So I did that. And then when I came back, I was doing a presentation, and that photograph was in my PowerPoint. And a friend of mine who is a painter, is an artist, she asked me if she could take that photo and turn it into a painting. And she turned it into the most beautiful watercolor. And she auctioned that off as a silent auction, as one of our fundraisers for missions at our church. And I put in as much money as I could for that painting, because I wanted that painting, and it's hanging on my wall, and I absolutely love it. So the picture of the woman in this photo that's now a painting and the sun rising in Shikuki are probably my two favorites that I've taken.
Yeah, Andrew, you brought up two great points there. One is, and I meant to say this earlier, in some mission experiences and situations, we've been in communities where photographs are very rare, particularly having personal photographs of a family. They simply don't have the resources to either have a camera or have somebody photograph their family as a whole. And so I've been on a couple of mission experiences where I'm on the work site, and families have asked me to take their photograph and to send them a copy of it, because they don't have a way to get physical photographs of their family as mementos.
And they've never
and so there have been several occasions where I've taken photographs of a family and gotten their mailing address and actually sent the photographs I had taken back to them as kind of a memento and a way to say thank you for hosting us. The other thing, which I think is a great suggestion you brought up, is I've been on a couple of teams where we've had photographs that have been sold to raise money for the next mission or the next team that's going. And so that can be a really good tool as well, to not only tell the story, but also raise money for the next team who's going out as well.
Yeah, when I've spent a little time in Haiti too, and one of the team leaders would take a portable battery operated printer, and she spent an afternoon taking photos of the kids in this school, and she spent another afternoon printing them out and taking them to the school and delivering them, so these kids could have a picture of themselves and pictures of themselves with their friends.
Yeah, that's a great thing to do as well, particularly for those communities who may not have access to a camera photographs. It's very meaningful to them for you to send them those things and provide those for them as well.
I'm sorry, one more thing. I really enjoyed this photography segment. I have not been able to attend all of them because of my work schedule, and I had to log out, I think, one day last week early. But this is something that we've been kind of briefed on very briefly before our trips in prior times, but it's always nice to have a refresher.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. Well, I'm glad to do it and very excited to do it. It's something I get really excited talking about. So I want to move on quickly just to kind of get to some mobile photography do's and don'ts. So in recent years, I don't know how many of you have iPhones versus Android devices, but for all extensive purposes, most of the camera apps are fairly similar, no matter what phone or device you're using. And so I just turned my flashlight on here for some reason, hang on. So your phone camera can be a really powerful tool, and in many cases, really free you up to take a lot of photographs. It's not heavy, it's unobtrusive. And as much as I like, lugging my SLR around, and it takes great photographs, and these lenses are great, but it is a very heavy thing. And to switch lenses, to set it down, to make sure I got the SD card out and the batteries charged, all that stuff sometimes can become a hindrance. And so you can take really good photographs with your phone now. And this is something, if you haven't seen, I know Apple runs an iPhone photography contest every year. And you can look and see some of these just amazing, incredible photographs that photographers have taken, and you wouldn't be able to believe that they just took them on their iPhone. They really can produce some very gorgeous images now. The lenses on your phone, they're not quite as high caliber as something, that you would put on an SLR camera, but they do a very good job of documenting and provide very clear and crisp images as well. This photo in the upper right of your screen here, which I'm sure you recognize if you've been to our website, of another Haitian boy on rooftop, that was a photograph I'd actually taken on my phone. And you see, the bottom photograph is one that I took on my Canon SLR at the time, a big camera, and compare that with the one above it. I mean, just in terms of quality and color, you get some great, crisp, sharp images with your phone. And these same basics of photography, of framing and the rule of thirds, you can use all of these things to take really gorgeous pictures on your phone as well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about basics of mobile photography and how that works as well. So here are two more photos I had taken on my iPhone. The one on the left is a photo from Costa Rica in a rural village. This was a school, and these boys were very interested in what I was doing. And I think my big camera had run out of battery by that point. So I asked if I could take their photograph with my phone. And the way the light was coming in from the outside, particularly with the boy in the yellow there, you see he's not quite centered. He's kind of off centered in that bottom third. It was just the lighting was good, and the way their expressions and kind of the way things were framed, it turned out being a pretty good photograph that I was able to capture with my phone. And the one on the right, that's Sydney Opera House. That is from Katie and I's travels, non-mission related, but all that to say, your phone is a powerful tool and really can create some crisp images if you follow the same composition rules we talked about earlier. You'll see on the right side with the Sydney Opera House, the bottom third is the subject, the top third. I love that the sky was so blue, and that color really made the Opera House pop out in that shot. And you see the silhouette, very tiny, the silhouette of the moon up in the sky and the top upper left third of the photograph. I tried to figure out a way to show you my phone screen to kind of run you through the controls of what a phone app would look like. So I'm going to try and put this up to the screen. This may not work and may not be helpful at all, but so let me end the screen share so you can see a little better. let's see. And sorry, I tried really hard to figure out how to do this, but so you see here, so this is an iPhone 12, I think. Let me see if I can get it to focus a little better. Maybe not. So it's a little blurry, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But one thing I would suggest if you haven't taken a lot of photographs with your phone is really go through and play with it. Just mess with the buttons and see what happens. The camera apps on your phone will do a lot of the work for you these days, and so even on auto mode, they do a pretty good job of highlighting the subject and of making sure the light is balanced and right. If you want to do some kind of more advanced things with your phone, there are specialty apps you can use, which will give you some really great control over your phone's camera. And let me pull some of these up on the screen just so you can see them as well. So one that I use a lot is called Halide, and it is an app for the iPhone. I think it's like maybe $5 or $6, I can't remember, on the App Store. Halide is a great app, and it really allows you to control your phone's camera and adjust the settings the same way you would with an SLR or mirrorless camera. And so you can play with the light, the aperture, the depth of field, the exposure, all that stuff. Camera Plus is also another very popular one. That one is for Apple devices. One that is good for Android and iPhone is called ProShot. That is a very good cross-platform. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Instagram. Instagram has a built-in camera function in the app. So if you're on an iPhone or on an Android device, you can pull up Instagram and pull up the camera function in Instagram and get some pretty decent photographs as well. And then your native camera app, which by that I mean just the default camera app on your iPhone or Android device, these days can do some pretty amazing advanced things as well. I know on the iPhone, now there's something called portrait mode, which you can isolate down there at the bottom. It's a function that gives you a really shallow depth of field and kind of blurs out the background and isolates and highlights the subject of the person whose photograph you're taking. You can adjust the light and take panoramic photographs. So all that to say, taking a photograph on a phone versus an SLR is not nearly as daunting a task as taking on a big camera. But if you want that to have those particulars, if you really want to mess with it and really get into the nitty-gritty of controls, a lot of these camera apps have that built in. And so if you've never done this before, just mess with it, just see what happens. Just photograph the same subject over and over, mess with the aperture, mess with the shutter speed, just to get a sense of what it's doing. Because we're all digital now, it's not going to hurt you to take 100 pictures, 1,000 pictures, just to mess with it and see what it does. And so, and really, being a good photographer and getting to know your camera is really just a matter of messing with it and making a lot of mistakes and practicing. My wife is always really shocked that when I get home from vacation or get home from a mission experience, she'll ask me how many photographs I've taken over the course of a day or a week. And usually it's in the hundreds, if not thousands. And so my philosophy as a photographer is I'll take as many photographs as I can in the hopes that one or two are really, really great photos. And so don't be afraid to just take a lot of photos, and chances are the more you take, the bigger chance you have that one is just a really great photograph. So get your camera phone, mess with it, play with it, and kind of see what it does. In terms of resources for going further and exploring photography, particularly with your phone, there's a YouTube channel called iPhone Photography School. And whether or not you have an iPhone, even if you have an Android, this YouTube channel has some really great tips and tricks for how to mess with your phone's camera and how to manipulate it in a way that allow you to take good photographs. If you want to delve into it deeper and don't mind paying a couple of bucks, you may be familiar with the websites, Masterclass or Domestika, which are kind of online teaching courses. Those websites have photographers who they contract with that do little workshops that are an hour or 2 hours. And usually you have to pay something for them, but it's not much usually. And they're a good resource as well. And I've used those for other things. And then I know the Apple Store, if you have an Apple device, the Apple Store will sometimes have free classes in person or online, which will have little workshops of how you take a good photograph and other things as well. So all that to say, I know that was a very brisk walk through a lot of photography things, and I've thrown a lot of information at you, and probably didn't cover something you wanted to cover and said too much about something else. But any questions or comments you want to share? We're coming up to the end of time here, so I want to make sure we covered something that you wanted that maybe I didn't cover.
Yeah, Matt, I just really quick, I'll share something that was very useful to me that I learned, and it's been very helpful ever since. It's I've incorporated Google Photo in with my iPhone, so that every photo I take with my phone automatically goes into the Google format, if you will, or goes into the Google Share, so that I can create and I can do whatever, and I can put other folks into the listings. I mean, there's so much work you can do with that. But the fact is that you don't have to sit there and get on the computer, move this, move the memory cards, none of that. It's all automatic. So whatever I shoot on my phone is automatically out there, and it's so much easier. And I highly recommend it to anybody that hasn't gone that far yet. And I don't know, I'm sure Android's got the same opportunity or options to it, but at least on the iPhone, it's very, very simple to use and worth looking into.
Yeah, and you reminded me of something, Mike, too. One thing I was going to say, on your iPhone or even your Android now, and this is maybe is getting a little too technical, but there's something called a raw photograph. And if you look at your camera app on your iPhone or your Android device, raw photographs are very big image files that you could take with your phone or your big camera, and they really allow you to edit the photos in a very powerful way. I mean, you can, with raw files, you can make a kind of a boring photograph into an interesting one if you edit it enough. And so if you want to take a very big file of a photograph, you're going to print something, or you just want to see or dip your toe into editing photos, that raw camera file function is built in to Apple products, and I think Android as well. Anyway, so anybody else have anything they want to share or ask?
Matt, one thing, you talk about photo editing. Adobe has some apps that you can put onto your phone. I think it's, is it Lightroom? And it's kind of like a light version, so to speak, of Photoshop. And so it allows you to actually do the editing on your phone instead of having to download it onto your computer and use Photoshop or something.
Yeah,
but also,
Adobe has some great tools. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember if that one was a cost. I don't think it was very much if it was for that app.
Yeah, Adobe, and I use Lightroom and Photoshop to edit my photos. They've gone to a subscription-based model now, and they do have a kind of like a lighter version of Lightroom that's not as, doesn't have all the features, but kind of gives you the basic editing function. And the Adobe makes some very powerful tools to edit photographs. Yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to share before we close out?
Well, I'm not sure how it applied so much to mission work, but I can tell you, as a maintenance man, we take a lot of pictures, and people send me pictures all the time and say, "Look here, here's this thing that has to be fixed," and until they put some kind of verbiage in there that says where it's at, what it is, you can't tell from the photograph anything. So be careful about the technical aspect of things if you're trying to relay some information to somebody, that send enough information to where they can actually identify it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always helpful to have some background to go along with the photo as well. Well, as I said, we're coming to the end of time. Again, I'm not a professional. This is something I do because I love to do it, and I don't know. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll try my best to answer them. Again, I'm not a professional, but it's a hobby, and have been doing it for a while now. So, but there are, again, some great resources out there as well if you'll just Google them.
Matt,
Good stuff.
Earl posted a question. He assumed that the ethical rules that you discussed for photography also apply to video when you use your camera phone for video.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are good rules of thumb to use for video as well. Okay, well, I'll turn it back over to Tammy or Karen to close us out. And it looks like there's some questions about the recordings of the sessions. I'll let them answer.
Yeah, we will get recordings out that you'll be able to share with your mission teams or any other small groups that where this information can be helpful. And we hope that you will do that. We thank you for the kind words for the Academy. We're glad that this was effective for you and that these sessions were ones that are helpful. So thank you for that. So yeah, if you didn't register, then we won't have your email. So if you would like to receive those recordings, put that in the chat, your email, and we'll be sure to get those out to you. Because we know some of you have been so excited about this, you've shared with other people, and that's absolutely wonderful. We do appreciate that. So Karen, anything else for the good of the community here?
I just want to thank you all. I unfortunately had to miss a lot of the sessions this week, so it's good to be on today and get to see everyone. So thanks for all your work. Thanks for coming. We love doing these, and we love to share ways that or information that we think will help enhance your mission journey. If you have ideas for any future sessions that we might develop into other workshops for an upcoming Mission Academy, please share that with one of us, with Tammy, Rhonda, Matt, or me. We would love to hear from you, love to hear your ideas on what would be helpful for you as you continue on your mission journey, wherever it may be.
We did a mission trip last year to a place in Costa Rica, if I remember right. It was just a Zoom online thing, and it was a lot of fun and very informative.
Very good. Okay, well, again, it's so good to see everybody again, to see all these faces from across the country and around the world. Thank you, Milton, for being here. Greg, it's always good to see you. Some key people that have a lot of UMVIM historical knowledge. We appreciate your presence here and being witness to how things are growing and changing and adapting to the COVID and everything that we have to do now. So we appreciate the opportunity to be with you. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Blessings on your day.
Good job, you guys.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny. Oh, you can stop recording.